and welcome to Tuesday Tea and Chat on the 17th of August. My name's Steph. I normally work at Wiltshire Library, and I'm going to share with you a number of poems that I've chosen this week of the theme of countryside and nature. Just to say that I'll be reading from 3 books today, which are all available in Wiltshire Library and in most of the other branches across Wiltshire. We were lucky enough to receive some money from the Reading Agency for the Reading Friends project, which enabled us to buy a copy of a number of poetry books to have in all the libraries. So they are currently available here, and hopefully they'll be available in your local library. Let's get started with the first one. So the first book I'm going to be reading from today is this book here. So it's The Poetry Pharmacy Returns. So it's the follow-up book by William Sieghart. I think in my previous Teen Chat I did read from his previous book, which we also have in the library. And these are a selection of poems that are kind of like prescriptive poems, so they can help, and in this book, for courage, healing and hope. So there's a lot of research on how poetry can actually really help with your well-being, and these poems have been selected particularly targeting certain areas that you might need some little bit of help with. So this is, I say, The Poetry Pharmacy Returns. And thank you to people who are watching live. Hi there, Donal. Thank you for joining me at 3 o'clock this afternoon. And I'm going to start with a poem called Lines Composed in a Wood on a Windy Day. So let me just open that up. And this is actually by Anne Bronte. This is Lines Composed in a Wood on a Windy Day. My soul is awakened, my spirit is soaring, and carried aloft on the winds of the breeze, for above and around me the wild wind is roaring, arousing to rapture the earth and the seas. The long withered grass of the sunshine is glancing, the bare trees are tossing their branches on high, the dead leaves beneath them are merrily dancing, the white clouds are scudding across the blue sky. I wish I could see how the ocean is lashing, the foam of its billows to whirlwinds of spray. I wish I could see how its proud waves are dashing, and hear the wild roar of their thunder today. I wish I could see how its proud waves are dashing, and hear the wild roar of their thunder today. That's Lines Composed in a Wood on a Windy Day by Anne Bronte. The writer is that they're obviously they're in their wood on a windy day, but they're actually thinking about how they really wish they were somewhere else. Anne Bronte, the youngest of the Bronte family. And of course their books, when they first published their works, of course they didn't publish them under their own names. They didn't want to be prejudiced because they were females. So Anne's pseudonym was actually Acton Bell, which of course were the same initials, Anne Bronte, so she's used the same initials. And similarly, her 2 sisters, so that's Charlotte and Emily, they had their pseudonyms of Currer and Ellis. So there you go. So that was Lines Composed on a Wood in a Windy Day. I'm now going to take another poem. This is by Robert Frost, who is an American writer and poet. This is one of the most famous poems from an American poet called The Road Not Taken. So you might know this one, and this is a good poem for people who maybe can't decide what road to take, maybe for people who have lived in the past. Maybe you've chosen something and you regret, maybe. But anyway, so this poem is a reflection on that. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both. And be one traveller long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. That's The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. So interestingly, he was an American poet, but his work initially was actually published here in England before it was published in the United States. And he's the only poet to receive 4 Pulitzer Prizes for poetry. So that's by Robert Frost, and those 2 poems were both from this book here, The Poetry Pharmacy Returns. So I'm going to now move on to this book here, another collection of books. So the 3 books that I'm reading from are all collections of poems. And this one is Favourite Poems of the Countryside. And this is edited by Samuel Carr. And this is a celebration of British countryside from William Shakespeare to John Betjeman. It says it's a rich collection of poetry that celebrates our idyllic countryside with verses on rural life, the changing seasons, the vast woodlands and seascapes of Britain, and the wildlife that inhabit them. And it's beautifully illustrated. If I can just show you a few of the illustrations. So here's what I'm going to read in a minute. So there's lots of illustrations throughout, just to kind of throughout the book, which are rather lovely to look at. So it's a lovely book. And as I say, it's split into 6 sections, living in the country, working in the country, and so forth. And I'm going to read a couple of these that I've picked out for you today. And the first one is about the countryside. So it's by Christina Rossetti. If I just turn out here, and it has got a beautiful illustration. I'll just show it. It's beautiful. Can you see a shepherd with the lambs and sheep? And this is actually a poem called The Lambs of Grassmere, by Christina Rossetti. The upland flocks grew starved and thinned. Their shepherds scarce could feed the lambs, whose milkless mothers buttered them, or who were orphaned of their dams. The lambs at thirst for mother's milk filled all the place with piteous sounds. Their mother's bones made white for miles the pastureless wet pasture grounds. Day after day, night after night, from lamb to lamb the shepherds went, with teapots for the bleating mouths, instead of nature's nourishment. The little shivering, gaping things soon knew the step that brought them aid, and fondled the protecting hand and rubbed it with a woolly head. Then, as the days waxed on to weeks, it was a pretty sight to see. These lambs with frisky heads and tails, skipping and leaping on the lea, bleating in tender, trustful tones, resting on roggy crack or mound, and following the beloved feet that once had sought for them and found. These very shepherds of their flocks, these loving lambs so meek to please, are worthy of recording words and honour in their due degrees. So I might live 100 years, and roam from strand to foreign strand, yet not forget this flooded spring and scarce saved lambs of Westmoreland. That's The Lambs of Grassmere by Christina Rossetti. And it starts off kind of like thinking, where's this going? It starts off quite bleak. The land is presumably flooded, so there's no pasture, there's no grass ground for the mothers to feed on, and so in terms they're struggling to feed the lambs. But the shepherds come and help them. They're kind of helping them feed them, maybe bringing them, I don't know what, maybe they're bringing them some cow's milk, I don't know, but they're bringing them back, saving them, and so they then do thrive, and they're frisking. So the second, there's 4 verses, and of course the third one, it's a pretty sight to see because suddenly the lambs are all frisking again and skipping and leaping. So that's lovely. So it's lovely, and that's got a beautiful illustration there of the shepherd helping the lambs there. Just going to have a quick drink. I didn't say at the start, but I'm drinking my coffee here today. And since we're doing about countryside and nature, I've got my mug here with some nice ladybugs on it. So that's a fun mug I'm using today with my nice coffee. So I'm going to do another one now. I'm going to do actually a couple about the morning in the countryside. And the first one is a poem by John Clare, and it's called On a Summer's Morn. And I just maybe close your eyes if you want, and just picture, just listen to, it's quite a beautiful description in this poem. Maybe you can just imagine what it would be like, what he's seeing, what the poet is seeing on this summer's morn. I love to peep out on a summer's morn, just as the scouting rabbit seeks her shed, and the coy hare squats nestling in the corn, frit at the bowed ear tottering o'er her head, and blundering pheasant, that from covert springs, his short sleep broke by early trampling feet, makes one to startle with his rustling wings. As through the boughs he seeks more safe retreat, the little flower begemmed around with drops that shine at sunrise like to burnished gold. 'Tis sweet to view. The milkmaid often stops and wonders much such spangles to behold. The hedger too admires them and deck the thorn, and thinks he sees no beauties like the morn. On a Summer's Morn by John Clare. I really like that. The little flower begemmed around with drops that shine at sunrise like to burnished gold. So obviously there's a bit of morning dew on these flowers, and of course as the sunlight is rising and the sunlight's glimmering, and it's just making everything glisten and shine, which is rather lovely. So that's John Walk, and it kind of inspires us, doesn't it? I don't know, it makes you think about maybe early morning walks. I love to go out if I can on an early morning walk. I love the kind of the beauty and the stillness that you can sometimes get if you're going on an early morning walk, and just as everything's waking up, so the animals are waking up, birds waking up, and they're kind of like moving around. And so yeah, that's On a Summer's Morn. Now another poem rather in this book I'm going to show, which is on a similar theme. It's called A Daybreak, and again it's got this beautiful illustration. I do love this illustration. Daybreak, and it's taken from The Faithful Shepherdess, and this is by John Fletcher, who was a Jacobean playwright. This is Daybreak. See, the day begins to break, and the light shoots like a streak of subtle fire. The wind blows cold while the morning doth unfold. But now the birds begin to rouse, and the squirrel from the boughs leaps to get him nuts and fruit. The early lark that erst was mute carols to the rising day, many a note and many a lay. That's Daybreak by John Fletcher. And that's similar, isn't it? It's kind of contrasting with John Clare, On a Summer's Morn, but there are similarities. So the animals stirring, the birds begin to rouse, the squirrels bounding about. Of course, in the John Clare's book, he talks about the hare, doesn't he? But in John Fletcher's, he's got a squirrel in his. But yeah, all the animals and birds kind of waking up as the sun is rising. That's beautiful. I really like that one. And John Fletcher, I didn't know this, but apparently he was a Jacobean playwright, and he followed William Shakespeare as the house playwright for the King's Men, who were the acting company to which William Shakespeare belonged to for most of his career. And apparently John Fletcher, who I've only recently come across, he collaborated on writings with Francis Beaumont, but he also did collaborate with Shakespeare on 2 plays. So John Fletcher and Shakespeare worked on 2 plays together, Henry VIII and the 2 Noble Kingsmen. So there you go. So that's Daybreak by John Fletcher. And that and the other two poems were taken from this book here, which is the Favourite Poems of the Countryside, which we have here in Melksham Library. Now I'm going to turn now to the third book that I'm reading from today. And this is another lovely book here, and it's called A Year of Reading Aloud, put together by Georgina Rogers. And it basically says this is a book, it's a collection of 52 poems to learn and love. So they're all quite short poems in this book. And it says on the back, the ancient tradition of learning and reciting poetry is renowned for its well-being benefits, from strengthening the mind and boosting creativity to improving memory. So this is a lovely collection of of short poems, so they will be easier to learn, and a really lovely, a range of poems from both kind of old, kind of classical kind of poems that you might have heard of, but some more modern, more contemporary poems as well. So poets from people like Sylvia Plath and Maya Angelou, amongst others, in this lovely collection. So the first one I'm going to read from here is a poem from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. If I just get to the page. And this is a poem he wrote towards the end of his life. Sadly, he'd been married twice. Both his wives had died, and he wrote this poem after witnessing the deaths of his two wives, sadly, which did leave him quite heartbroken. And so this poem is The Tide Rises and the Tide Falls, and it's often interpreted as being about human mortality. Here we go. So this is The Tide Rises and the Tide Falls. The tide rises, the tide falls. The twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands damp and brown, the traveller hastens towards the town. And the tide rises, the tide falls. Darkness settles on roofs and walls, but the sea, in the darkness calls. The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands, and the tide rises, the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh as the hostler calls. The day returns, but never more returns the traveller to the shore, and the tide rises, and the tide falls. And that's by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. How did that poem make you feel? Kind of a little bit sad, knowing that it was written in his later years after the deaths of his two wives, but it's quite contemplative as well, I think. And it's got that kind of repetition, hasn't it? The tide rises, the tide falls. There are three stanzas, and it ends on the same line, and starts with the same line, doesn't it? The tide rises, the tide falls, and there's that kind of just repetition. You know, it's like the cycle of life is just ongoing. The tide just comes in and out, in and out. I love that line, the line in the middle. The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands. So of course, whenever you walk on the sand, you might leave your footprints, but they're just going to be cleared as soon as the tide comes in. The footprints, they disappear. No matter how many times you leave footprints in sand, by the next day they'll be gone. So that's, I'll say, the tide rises, the tide falls. Now I'm going to move on now to one of my favourite subjects, being a bit of a tree hugger. This is a poem called Trees, simply entitled Trees, and I love this one. It's by Joyce Kilmer, another American writer. Their full name is actually Alfred Joyce Kilmer, so you might think that, you might assume it was a woman, Joyce Kilmer, but actually Alfred Joyce Kilmer. And he's regarded as this is his most famous poem, and thought to be one of the most quoted poems in American history. And this is, as I say, Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms at pray, A tree that many in summer wear, a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. And that's Trees by Joyce Kilmer. I really like that. If you picture a tree, and I love the line with a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair. Up in the top of the tree, it's really kind of it's giving the tree almost like some human kind of characteristics, isn't it? You know, it's got a hungry mouth. You know, it's talking about the brows being arms lifting up, praying. But then, of course, the when it's in summertime and it's full of leaves, that's like the hair. So the crown of the trees, the hair. Yeah, so that's Trees by Joyce Kilmer. I've just got one more. It's a short one I'm going to finish with, which I thought was fun. And it's in the same the tree having the birds in the hair of the tree. Well, this is about a man who has maybe some birds in his beard. And it's actually by Edward Lear. So it's a comic poem. It's actually a limerick. So Edward Lear, a bit like Lewis Carroll, were known for writing some nonsense verse, and Edward Lear in particular is famous for his limericks, the 5-line comic verses. And I'm going to finish with that for today. And so this is his limerick. There was an old man with a beard. There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." There was an old man with a beard who said, "It is just as I feared. 2 owls and a hen, 4 larks and a wren have all built their nests in my beard." And that's by Edward Lear. A little bit of something light and humorous to finish with today. So I hope you've enjoyed some of my selections of poems today from these 3 really lovely books. So that's A Year of Reading Aloud, Favourite Poems of the Countryside, and The Poetry Pharmacy Returns. They're all available here in Melksham Library today. And most of them will be available in other branches, maybe your local branch, if Melksham isn't your local one. I've got a few other poetry books here which I've just picked up sales, just have a few books in the background there. So you do check out the poetry books that we have here in the Wiltshire libraries, because we have bought a number of new books this year with the support of the Reading Agency. So thank you very much for joining me today. There'll be another tea and chat in 2 weeks' time, so do look out for the posts on social media about that. I'm not sure what the theme is going to be yet, but there will be one in 2 weeks' time. That would actually be the 31st of August. There should be one. Do comment if there's any poem that I've read today that you particularly liked, or if there's any poems or collection of poetry that you think it'd be nice for the libraries to have a copy of. And yeah, we always appreciate any kind of comments that you might have. And you know, if there are any poems that particularly have any have a strong you have a strong connection with or mean a lot to you, we'd love to kind of hear anything like that too. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. If you were watching live, and if you're watching later on catch up, I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks for watching, and take care, and see you soon. Bye.